Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Malcolm Scott. Malcolm is a postgraduate student and researcher at the University of Canterbury. He is also recognized by the New Zealand Tertiary Education Commission. Prior to joining the University of Canterbury, Malcolm has held academic appointments with the University of Otago, Christchurch College of Education, and the Christchurch Polytechnic Institute of Technology. As part of his postgraduate work, Malcolm is writing a thesis on whether New Zealand's Ministry for the Environment is engaged in a practice of intentional disinformation regarding the ongoing and persistent aerosol program in New Zealand. Malcolm's interest was piqued when, after submitting a Freedom of Information request known as an OIA in New Zealand, he received back, by accident, an internal document detailing how the ministry responds to geoengineering inquiries. That response entailed denying that any such programs exist. That document has led Malcolm to conclude that the New Zealand government is aware and complicit in covering up the covert operation to geoengineer the atmosphere. A link to the document is included in the show notes below. And so without further ado, here's Malcolm Scott. Malcolm, thank you so much for coming on the show. And you had a very interesting experience with the government of New Zealand, which resulted in you receiving a document that gave a rare glimpse into how governments possibly are handling the whole geoengineering aerosol program, aka chemtrails, internally. But before we get into that, I was wondering if you can give the audience a little bit of information about your background and how you ended up researching and investigating the geoengineering program.
Yeah, well, thank you for the invite, Mike. So, my name's Malcolm Scott, and I'm a postgraduate researcher in Christchurch, New Zealand. And how I got into this really dates back to 2011 when Christchurch experienced a major earthquake. You know, it was internationally reported, so people have probably heard about it and read about it. And of course, 180 people in Christchurch lost their lives. That was the year that I kind of started to hear about chemtrails. It wasn't long after that earthquake we were starting to hear about reports on social media about aircraft spraying chemicals into the atmosphere. Most of it was coming from North America. We were wondering about this. And the funny thing for me, Mike, was I remember this quite distinctly. It was sort of maybe June or July that year. It was winter in Christchurch. It was only about 4 or 5 months after the earthquake, and the CBD was completely shut down. It was cordoned off, and I was walking around an area of the city, and it had this sort of ghostly quietness about it. And I looked up and I saw this long aerosol trail across the city, and I thought, wow, I wonder if that's what people are talking about. I wonder if that's one of those chemtrails people are talking about. And it startled me because it was unlike any kind of aircraft vapor trail I'd ever seen before. It literally stretched from one horizon to the next, and it persisted for hours. And after that event, I started seeing more of them. And then towards the end of 2011, I think it was about the 23rd of December 2011, we had another earthquake. I can't remember the magnitude. Fortunately, no one was injured or killed that day. But our building was evacuated, and I had to get out of the building. And it was like 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. We're sort of standing around in the car park. Everyone's, quite sort of shaken from the event. And I look up and I see more aerosol trails. And I started to think, is there a connection here? Are these earthquakes and these aerosol trails connected? And that's really when I woke up to what was going on, and started to do some investigation. And then, again, learned a lot about this through social media mainly. But then in 2013, I was working as a counsellor with one of my clients. My client was very concerned about her son, who was also investigating chemtrails, and he was becoming very distressed about this. And as a consequence, because he had a prior mental health history, he was interviewed by his psychiatrist. And on the testament of his mother and his concern about chemtrails, he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And in New Zealand, what that means is he was required to be compulsorily detained in a secure mental health unit, and he was treated with antipsychotic medication. And that really distressed me very much because I knew that this young man's concerns were legitimate. I knew that what he was seeing and what he was learning about were real, but he was being treated as if he was mentally unwell. And when that happened, I got very concerned. So I started to do some investigation for myself. At that time, I emailed a senior atmospheric scientist at NIWA in New Zealand. That's the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research. He's a very well-known atmospheric researcher. He's published on the topic of geoengineering. And I emailed him about this, and I said, look, I'm really concerned. I've heard reports of chemtrail activities. Can you please tell me what's going on? And the email I got back from him was, very short, and he simply said, I have no idea about chemtrails, haven't heard about them here or anywhere else. And when I got that message, I thought, hey, wait a minute. Thousands of people are talking about chemtrails. Millions of people around the world know about this, and an atmospheric scientist is denying any knowledge. And when I got that message, I began to piece together that actually there's a very deep complicity going on here. And that's really what got me into the research, Mike.
Now, do you think that complicity, Malcolm, has to do more with that they are actually knowingly involved in the programs, or, in other words, they're active participants, or they may be participating, maybe involuntarily? It's not being complicit as much as it has to do with the fact that they may lose their job if they open their mouth.
Yeah, I think both is happening actually, Mike. In the case of the scientist I was in touch with, I've later been informed from a reliable source that actually he is deeply complicit in the program, and several of his colleagues. New Zealand is a very small country, and NIWA is our leading atmospheric research institute. It's not plausible for this program to be operating in New Zealand without NIWA's knowledge or involvement. So in this case, this scientist is very clearly complicit with the program, is involved with analysis, data analysis and program evaluation, and is completely denying that involvement. In the other case, in the broader scientific community, for example, among scientists in the area of climatology and atmospheric research, yeah, of course, all of them know about it. You couldn't be an atmospheric scientist and not know about it. But they may not be directly involved with it. In other words, their area of research is not directly connected to geoengineering, but they can't avoid knowing that it's happening. They just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And there's a very good example of that, actually. I saw a YouTube clip from a conference maybe a couple of years ago, I'm not sure how recent it was, where Tim Lenton, who's a climate scientist from the University of Exeter, was questioned about aerosol spraying programs, and he kind of let slip, none of us want this current uncontrolled experiment to continue. And obviously he was referring to the widespread aerosol geoengineering that's taking place. But when he was questioned about that further, he said actually he was talking about the proposal of geoengineering as if it was something for the future. So, even scientists who aren't directly involved with it, who know it's happening, and some of them would know quite a lot about it, are in complete denial about this. And to me, that's quite shocking because many of these people are working for publicly funded institutions. They have a duty of care to the public, and they're completely failing in their responsibility to inform the public about this.
I think, Malcolm, that there is a lot of scare tactics too. As an example, not a scientist, but here in the United States, we've had situations where meteorologists will go on the television and attempt to address these, what they call persistent contrails, right?
Yeah,
we call them
yeah.
chemtrails.
Yeah.
So they will call them military chaff. In fact, there was one guy that came on television, and he said this, and I couldn't believe he said it. He had said that they have their software, which takes a look at the Doppler radar and such, that can actually strip out the cloud cover that is caused by the aerosol spray.
Okay.
Okay? So he mentioned it real quick. Those of us that are familiar with geoengineering and are into the activism, we caught it. It was very clear what he was saying. They're able to extract it out when they show it to the public. So which
Sure.
says is
Yeah.
they know it's there.
Yeah.
Because for him to say we can delete it, essentially take it out, means that he knows it's there to start with.
Mm.
But what happens is, everybody has to earn a living. Everybody has to put food on the table. Everybody has to pay a mortgage. I believe many of these people are told if you open your mouth, if you say something, it could mean that you're going to lose your job or some other type of consequences, which are not going to be favorable to that person. And it's a very tough thing to overcome because a lot of people will listen to this and they'll say, well, forget about the job. You should just tell the truth. You should just be out there and just say what you've got to say and so on. But it's just not that easy. I know that it's difficult for people to put their job on the line and take a risk that they're going to get fired or let go. The controllers have a lot of these people between a rock and a hard place. I mean, they know that the possibility that somebody's going to be a whistleblower is very, very small.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. And I think for a broadcaster to go public on this would probably be the end of their career.
Yeah.
I think for people working in the commercial aviation industry, probably be the end of their career. But, in my area, because I work for a university and because I'm engaged in postgraduate research, the area that really disturbs me is that the people who are working for publicly funded institutions, and these are like the Ministry for the Environment, Civil Aviation Authority, the Environmental Protection Authority, publicly funded atmospheric research institutes. All of these people actually are paid by the taxpayer. They have a duty of care to the public. They are in a different category.
Yeah.
They actually have a duty to report this, and they're not. And, that to me is extremely disturbing. And, really the public needs to be holding these officials accountable.
Now, the problem here in the United States, as an example, is we've had a long history of making examples out of whistleblowers.
Yeah.
So if certain people come forward and they start talking about, as an example, vaccines in the CDC, it could get very, very tight and very ugly for those folks. The problem is that the governments, at least here in the United States, and it's probably the same in New Zealand and the rest of the NATO countries, they're so corrupt that, laws don't mean anything. Laws are applicable to you and me.
Yeah.
But when it comes to them, it's really lawless. It's whatever it is they believe they need to do or whatever it is they wish to do to push an agenda forward, they're going to do. And anybody who is stepping out of line, then they're going to apply an enormous amount of pressure on them.
Yeah, there's another aspect to this too, I think, Mike. And that is, even the people working in those areas, if they're not directly involved with the program, they know about it. But even for them, they question, could this really be happening? Now, there's a lot of people that have heard about chemtrails. It's very easy to find out about it. You only have to Google it. You can find thousands of links about it. But you see, even though people actually hear about it and think about it, it actually takes quite a step of development for yourself to actually acknowledge that it's really happening. And I think there's a lot of people working in government agencies who have been told about the chemtrail program, but at some level, they still are in denial themselves at a personal level. They can't quite believe that their government would actually do this. They can't quite believe that this is really happening. They might think, it's a small experimental program. There's discrete activities here and there. But as soon as you get to the conversation around, well, actually, this is a global program, almost every developed country in the world is being sprayed. And then you go a little bit further down that and say, actually, this may not be about solar radiation management. This may actually be about exotic weapon systems. It may be about the delivery of biological agents directly targeting human populations. When you get to that kind of conversations, people just shut down. They just can't cope with that. And they really don't want to know about it. And I've emailed a number of academic researchers at various New Zealand universities about this, and most of them don't even reply to my email. They just don't want to know.
On my alternate YouTube channel, I have a 1952 declassified Navy documentary. It's internal military footage, and at the time, they were talking about how aerosols, spraying, could be a tremendous benefit in the arena of warfare.
Oh, yeah.
And this is going back to 1952. And in this footage, and I'll put the link in the show notes so folks can take a look at it, they had mentioned, that countries like the UK, the United States, that there were tests that were being run that had to do with spraying the population. And they just kept espousing the benefits of this type of program and how it has to be pursued. So This footage wasn't talking about maybe we shouldn't do this, maybe we should think about this. Really what it was about was we need to find a better way, a bigger way to disperse aerosols to be able to have this type of, really what they were talking about was biological warfare. That's what they were talking about in this footage. So, it goes back to 1952 at least, and at least at that time, they were certainly talking about it and proposing it and considering it as a military type of weapon. And then we know, subsequent to that there have been many cases where they've sprayed folks in the UK and the United States and other countries covertly to try to understand human reaction to whatever it is that they had in the spray. Yeah. So this whole premise that they're not doing it, they wouldn't do it, that's just people who are naive. Those are people that haven't done their research. They just don't understand that this has been done many times over, I would say over the last 60 years or so.
There's another aspect to this, Mike, and I've been thinking about this since the last time we spoke. I think I said to you last time, you can go to your supermarket and walk down the solvents aisle. And, for $5 or $6, you can buy a can of fly killer. You can buy a poisonous spray can. You can take it home and you can be an aerosol operator, unregulated, unlicensed. You can kill anything in your home environment with a spray can. Now, there's a thing about people's consciousness here. Like, if you can go and get these kinds of chemicals and use them in your own home without a license, without any regulation, and then you tell people, well, actually, that's what they're doing to us with these airplanes. They're spraying us from the sky. People kind of think, well, that's not so bad. I can do that at home. There's this sort of level of consciousness that people don't connect what they're doing. They don't connect the toxicity and the danger and the damage of what they do in their own home. So do you think they really care about what's being done to them from the sky?
Another interesting comment that I will get back from people, Malcolm, is that when I do talk to them about it, some people will actually say that they know, they could see it, but they say to me, well, Mike, how do you know it's not a good thing? How do you know we're not doing something that's beneficial to us? Maybe it's something that they don't want us to know about because there'll be some kind of panic and some kind of societal disorder. So they're just trying to keep some kind of order. They're taking care of some business that us dummies down here don't need to know about. And my response back to them is, look, anytime that somebody does something and they're doing it without coming forward, they're doing it covertly, 99.99% of the time, it is not a good thing.
And just connected to that, Mike, is the whole dialogue around climate change and global warming. And here's the proxy. In order to avoid catastrophic climate change due to global warming, we have to geoengineer the atmosphere. That these aerosols are being used for solar radiation management, that we're trying to reduce incoming solar radiation, and we're protecting you, we're protecting land-based industries, and we are saving you from global warming. That's going to be the rhetoric. The fact is that may be one small part of the program, and I say one small part of the program because what they're not talking about is the atmospheric weapon systems. What they're not talking about are the biological agents specifically targeting human populations. What they're not talking about is the whole HARP, EMF, weather modification program. What they're not talking about is the delivery of chemicals to enhance GMO crop production or to actually, reduce non-GMO crop production. So there's a whole lot of other agendas at play here. But what we'll be told is it's actually to mitigate global warming.
The other interesting situation that comes up is whenever they talk about global warming, they never address the fact that there's spraying going on. So the whole concept of climate change and global warming extracts the fact that they're spraying, because they won't admit that they're spraying, but anybody with a half a brain knows they're spraying.
Exactly.
So this whole conversation that they're having at these climate conferences and so on with the United Nations and all these countries that are involved in this scheme, they just remove that. It's not part of the discussion, and they want to go on their merry way. My belief is that climate change or any global warming, even global cooling, whatever, that it's impossible to have that conversation and then say, we're not going to factor in any kind of spraying. We're not going to talk about that. That's the fallacy in the entire debate. And unfortunately, because so many people turn a blind eye to the aerosol spraying program, or they don't know about geoengineering, they take these talking heads and these pundits and these so-called scientists, they take them at their word at face value.
Which incidentally, Mike, connects us back to that issue around the memo from the Ministry for the Environment, because much of my correspondence with the Ministry for the Environment in New Zealand has been with their climate directorate. And, the point I make, which you've made also, is that you cannot research climate change if you do not factor in the geoengineering that's taking place. And the official line from the Ministry for the Environment in New Zealand since 2010 has been that there is no evidence of geoengineering in New Zealand, that New Zealand is not involved in an atmospheric geoengineering program, which of course the Ministry cannot substantiate.
And going back to that document, I think the other part of that was that they also said that we have no reason to believe that any such program exists anywhere in the world.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Yeah, no.
That's quite a statement to make.
Well, again, it's selective denial. I mean, the Ministry has been sent, coming back to that report, since 2010, the Ministry for the Environment in New Zealand has received around 25 or 26 separate reports from members of the public covering in excess of 35 instances of aerosol spraying. Recently, an associate researcher in New Zealand, his name is Nigel Gray, he coordinates the Weather Modification Watch Facebook group, has just sent to the Ministry a spreadsheet of over 80 reports of aerosol spraying, which he gathered in the last 3 months alone. I take an interest in reports posted on social media, and in New Zealand, there's at least three or four reports of aerosol spraying per week, and sometimes 3 or 4 reports in a single day. So, this aerosol spraying in New Zealand is taking place virtually on a daily basis, and these reports have been sent to the Ministry, but the Ministry hasn't investigated any of these reports. None.
Malcolm, so we can get the audience on board a little bit with what we're referring to here. There was a document that you had received back from the New Zealand government. It's called an OIA. I think that's probably equivalent to our Freedom of Information Act here in the United States. Okay.
Yeah, in New Zealand we call it the Official Information Act.
Okay. So you were asking specific questions and you were looking to receive information back. And so when you got your response back, you also received a document that initially you weren't supposed to see. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. They actually sent their official reply to me, but they mistakenly also sent me a copy of an internal memo, which was actually correspondence between officials within the Ministry, which wasn't actually intended to be sent to me. But what's interesting about this, Mike, and I didn't actually notice that until a few days later, What was interesting about that, Mike, was when they realised they'd made the mistake, they contacted me and they asked me to destroy the memo. And honestly, when a government official asks you to destroy a document, you know something very secretive is going on.
Yeah, that was amazing. And I have the document in front of me here. I'm going to read something here to the audience. It says the ministry and/or ministers receive regular correspondence and information requests of this nature, talking about the aerosol spraying program regarding purported atmospheric spraying, either of chemicals or for climate geoengineering. Correspondents often make multiple requests, but all inquiries have proved to be low risk, attracting little, if any, public or media attention. So what they're saying there, the way I'm interpreting this, is that they're assessing risk right off the bat, right? So,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
So if there's a low noise level, they're not going to worry about it too much. And it also says here that Ministry Legal and Communications have been consulted in preparing this response. So this went to the legal department as well.
yeah, that's correct. So the internal memo clearly indicates that the ministry takes an active interest in monitoring public and media attention to this subject, whilst continuing to deny any knowledge about it.
Yeah, it's really absolutely amazing. There was another part of the FOIA that you received back, and it's actually under a category called risks. And they say, we are aware that there are some groups in New Zealand who believe that atmospheric spraying or aerosol forcing operations are occurring. They may consider this response to be a suppression of information or may misinterpret text to justify their beliefs. However, these groups are small and have limited public profile.
Once again, it's an indication of the ministry's active monitoring of public and media attention to the topic. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then they reiterate their key message for the OIA response letter, which is New Zealand is not involved in any program of geoengineering or atmospheric aerosol solar radiation management. We have no reason to believe that any such program exists anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so after I received that memo, Mike, I wrote to the Ministry for the Environment and I requested the Minister himself, and there's a bit of a backstory to this one actually. The Minister for the Environment is Dr. Nick Smith, and he's been the Minister since 2008, I think. And anyway, he was questioned in Parliament about this in mid-2010. And for any of your listeners who have watched Michael J. Murphy's first documentary, What in the World Are They Spraying? About 5 minutes into that, first 5 minutes into that documentary, there is a segment where they actually show the question time in New Zealand Parliament, where Nick Smith categorically denies any program of aerosol spraying taking place in New Zealand. And the evidence that I have uncovered from the ministry is that since 2009, they have reiterated that advice to the public, but they have not investigated a single report that they've received. And so I wrote to the minister directly and requested that he retract that statement because the ministry cannot substantiate it. And the ministry know they cannot substantiate it. So a recent development since May this year is now the ministry, when it receives reports from the public, instead of replying to the respondent, they now refer the member of the public to the Civil Aviation Authority. And the Civil Aviation Authority now has a revised web page and it's a little bit like some of the information you would have seen in the US from NASA and other public organisations, where they talk about this notion of a persistent contrail. So what they're doing now is the ministry is directly referring the public to the CAA, and the CAA is giving this sort of standard line about persistent contrails. But what's really interesting, Mike, and this is a new development because I only just received this information a week or two ago, is that following my communication with the ministry in April, the Ministry for the Environment contacted the CAA and requested the CAA to update its website. And I have a copy of some of the emails that were exchanged between the ministry and the CAA. So what this is showing further is that different government organisations are communicating quietly to each other to maintain the cover. So they're both clearly complicit in this program.
So I would expect, Malcolm, that this is the same type of coordination and complicity that goes on, not just in New Zealand, but here in the United States and in other countries. Because in our country, I've done a lot of research into this myself over the years, and people will contact the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, about aerosols, and they will refer them to the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. So
Yeah,
what they do is they want to shuffle people back and forth. Clearly, what's going on there, in my view, is that it becomes a situation where it becomes exasperating for the person who's looking for information. They're just
yeah,
being tossed around and shuffled around. Eventually, they're hoping that this person will just go away. And typically, what winds up happening is when you do reach one of these agencies, you're typically speaking to somebody who is a low-level person on a desk,
yeah.
a help center in a particular function within those organizations. I mean, you're not anywhere near a part of that organization that has to do with decision making. You know, it's a game that they play.
There's another aspect to this, Mike, and it connects to this misinformation to the public that the notion of chemtrails are, what some people refer to as an urban myth. Now, if you look at Greenpeace UK website, Greenpeace UK claim that chemtrails are an urban myth. Another researcher in New Zealand that you will know well is Claire Sweeney. She contacted the CAA recently, and the reply that she got from the CAA is that chemtrails are an urban myth. Another researcher in New Zealand sent a request to the EPA. She got a reply stating that chemtrails are an urban myth. So I contacted the EPA about this, and I said, it looks like some of your staff have been informing the public that chemtrails are an urban myth. Please provide me with a detailed summary of the information that you have assessed to substantiate this. Well, the reply I got from the EPA is that they hold no information that substantiates the claim that chemtrails are an urban myth. In other words, what they're doing, Mike, is they're perpetuating this notion, this lie, but it's not based on any research or any documents that they hold. So this is clearly a campaign of misinformation.
It's absolutely stunning, Malcolm, that this is how they operate. Like you say, it is a program of misinformation and intentional deception. It's flat out lying. It's just lying and not even blinking.
Yeah, it is. It is a deliberate misinformation to the public. No other description for it.
Now, Malcolm, you have a summary report because you were working on a postgraduate paper. Is that correct?
What I'm doing is I'm planning a thesis on this subject. The thesis is connected to climate change, and all of my research to date has been to inform that thesis.
Okay. And the thesis, it has been written, yes?
No, the thesis hasn't been written. The reason the thesis is still in pre-proposal stage is because the further I go into this, the deeper I discover the level of complicity. How do you research something that everyone is denying? That is my challenge. Now, I've been in contact with other senior academic staff in this university about this subject. They don't want to know about it. I've been in contact with two senior academics whose research area is governance of geoengineering. And I say to them, hey, what's this thing about governance? The geoengineering's already happening. They don't want to know about that. So one of my challenges is actually being able to put together a research program that will be approved for a subject that everyone is denying is even happening.
So, Malcolm, do you think that it's going to get approved? It seems like nobody wants to talk to it.
It's not going to be easy, Mike. Yeah. So still working on that. It's work in progress.
Because I was going to ask you that. You're a postgraduate student, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right, and you're working on this, and last time we spoke, you said, look, as a student, I can go about researching this, investigating it, and there's not a whole lot of flack or pushback or people trying to ward you off.
Yeah,
However, once it gets to a point where it goes into the actual academics of a school,
yeah.
then it becomes problematic. Is that right? Or could be problematic?
Well, I think what's problematic for academics in this field, and we talked about this earlier, is that, well, I'll give you one example. I contacted a very well-known climate scientist in the US. If I mentioned his name, it would be immediately obvious who this person is. Internationally renowned climate scientist. His reply to me was, chemtrails do not exist. Now, you see, what academic is going to risk their reputation and their career to support a research program that everyone else is denying?
Right.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, that is the challenge.
Now, as a student, I don't have a career to protect. As a student, I'm not protecting my butt. I'm actually trying to do some serious inquiry here, but I'm not getting a lot of help, I got to tell you.
No, I didn't think you'd get a lot of help. Now, Malcolm, going forward after, let's say after your graduate work, are you looking to get into the area of academics or no?
I can't answer that at this stage, Mike. I mean, really, the challenge for me here is to get, and part of our interview here is about getting this information out to the public. And really, and the report that you've got is just one part of that. I mean, my work really at the moment is trying to substantiate as much as possible the level of complicity within New Zealand and within the New Zealand government about this. And there's a lot to this. I mean, firstly, I think part of the problem is a little bit of background around the program in New Zealand. The program in New Zealand cranked up to full scale around late 2009. Now, it's a military coordinated program. It's a joint military coordinated program. The New Zealand military working with Australian and US military counterparts. They work together to share aerosol supply chains. They work together to share aircraft and personnel. New Zealand's a very small country. We couldn't do this on our own. For example, unlike the US, we don't have remote and secret, locations for Air Force bases. We don't have that. Our Air Force bases are quite close to populated areas. People can watch the planes coming and going all the time. It's very hard to keep this kind of program secret. So the only way it can actually be run at full scale is if it's actually run as a military operation. It's classified. And as you know, as well as I do, the military have their own notions about what is publicly notifiable. If they're operating under a classified program, they don't have to tell anyone anything. They won't tell anyone anything. And even if the EPA or the Ministry of the Environment question the military about that, the military can just say, go away, it's classified. So, part of the challenge is you've got one branch of government trying to do its job, or perhaps supposed to be doing its job, but it actually can't because the military have overrun that. And this is a problem for every developed country in the world, Mike. The military are no longer controlled by their elected public officials.
Here in the United States, I guess maybe about 4 years ago, we had a situation where Leon Panetta was the Secretary of Defense, I believe he was at the time, and he was being questioned in Congress. And I believe the senator asking the questions was Jeff Sessions. And the question to Panetta was, when does the military deploy? Okay. So, and under whose guidance and whose direction and so on. When does the military go out and engage in some kind of military action, whether it be a war, whatever?
Yeah.
And Panetta had said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but this is a very accurate paraphrasing, that it would come from NATO and the United Nations.
Right.
That's what he said, from NATO and the United Nations, and they would let Congress know what it is that they were going to go do or what it is they were going to be engaged in. And that was it. Essentially what he was saying to them is, we're going to give you an FYI, information purposes only.
Yeah.
You don't have anything to say about what it is we're going to do. You can't stop us because
Yep.
we don't report to you. We don't take our orders and direction from you. This was an eye opener. And unfortunately, so many people, they don't pick up on this stuff. And,
Mm.
your discussion about the military and under the guise of national security, and they don't have to talk about this. Many folks really still have a difficult time getting their heads wrapped around the fact that there is a deep state, that there is a shadow government that is calling the shots, and that the people that we call our elected officials here in the U.S., we would talk about our senators and our House of Representatives in Congress, these are essentially low-level flacks
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are sitting in front of the curtain. And that's just to give the charade or the masquerade that, we've got some kind of representative government in place. And the truth of the matter is that behind them is the great Oz behind the curtain. And unfortunately, when you get into the work that you're in and doing the research and the work that I'm into, it's very clear that this deep state is pervasive across the world. It's
Yeah.
just the way it is, So it doesn't surprise me when New Zealand comes back and says, "Oh, we are unaware of any type of program."
Yeah.
It's all this is massive amounts of lying.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess in New Zealand is a member of ANZUS, which is a kind of tripartite military alliance between Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And following the 1980s, when the New Zealand brought in its anti-nuclear legislation, it really pissed the US off big time because they couldn't send their warships here anymore. But since 2008, when the current government was elected, the current national government elected, there's been this kind of warming of relationships between New Zealand and the US. And so ANZUS is alive and awake again. And I think, my personal view about this is that the geoengineering program, the aerosol spraying program happening in New Zealand, is New Zealand coming home. We've come back into the US alliance. We're working with the US with aerosol supplies and aerosol, materials and resources. But the other thing is connected to this on a broader context, Mike, is, clearly that the military is deeply involved in the coordination and delivery of the program, but also commercial airline operators are also complicit because, as you'll know, many of the reports we see from the public are actually videos and photographs of civil aircraft spraying aerosols. And, there have been reports by people in the aviation industry that civil aircraft have been modified with aerosol spraying equipment. But I also wonder, and, what I'm speculating on is I think a lot of the aerosol spraying from civil aircraft are actually through aerosols in the jet fuel.
Unfortunately, Malcolm, we don't have many pilots who have stepped forward to talk about this. And those that have said something about it, I've seen it just maybe a handful of times over the last several years, it's because they slipped up in a conversation. In other words, they were secretly recorded on a plane. Somebody had the phone out, and they were talking about, every once in a while, we got to push this button or this lever. That's what we do. But I'm unaware of any pilot that has come out, and I could be wrong, folks, so if I am wrong, you can email me. Any pilot that has stepped forward and said, yes, there is a program, yes, we are involved in it, our airline's involved in it, and so on. I don't know, I could be wrong, but I haven't seen anybody step forward definitively to make that statement.
Yeah, that really fascinates me, Mike, the level of complicity within the airline industry. Because particularly pilots, because of their place of work, they're frontline witnesses to this program on a daily basis. They, even if they're not actually involved in delivery of aerosols from their own aircraft, they must be witnessing it every day on every flight they take. And what amazes me is that they don't come back and actually talk about it. And I've been in contact with the New Zealand Airline Pilots Association, and advice I've received from them is that they have had no reports from their members. Now, that may or may not be accurate. I don't believe that pilots don't come back and have a chat in the bar after work and say, geez, did you see the trails today? They were really bad. I'm sure they talk about it privately together, But what amazes me is actually they're retaining that line of complicity that no one is willing to actually step outside and say, hey, this is way worse than you realize. It just amazes me.
I have personally been in a plane flying at 30,000 feet, Malcolm, and I would have a window seat, and I can see planes blowing out the aerosols. But there were also planes that were much higher
Mm,
than 30,000 feet. So they must have been flying at maybe 40,000 feet. My point being is, it's like you just said, it's not realistic to believe that these pilots don't know, because if I'm a passenger and
yeah,
I can
yeah,
sit in a plane and I can look out the window and I can see these plumes of aerosols just billowing out for
yeah.
miles, miles and miles. These guys are seeing them.
And what really, startles me about this, Mike, is that so many people who are not directly involved in the operation, but are complicit with it because they witness it, because they see it on a daily basis, but because they won't talk about it. I wonder about people's kind of moral code here. How can people keep this kind of secret? Clearly, what's happening is it can't be good for the environment. In fact, there's plenty of research, even within the academic community, about the risks of sulfates to the public, the risks of respiratory disorders, the effects of aluminium and barium to the environment, but also to the public. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist to know that this stuff is toxic, that this stuff is dangerous, and that this stuff will kill people. And in fact, it's interesting, in the heat waves, the summer heat waves in France and the UK back in 2003, the various mainstream media is reporting, it's something like 15,000 deaths due to heat stroke and heat exhaustion. Now, these aerosol sprays are known to have a heating effect in the atmosphere. The aerosol sprays sprayed at lower altitudes, for example, airline cruise altitudes around 30,000 feet. That is not stratospheric aerosol spraying, that is tropospheric aerosol spraying. And those aerosols actually have a heating effect. So it may be that some of these summer heat waves are actually being generated by the excess of aerosol in the atmosphere. And actually, that's actually killing people.
Yeah. In North Carolina, I know that if I go back just 5 or 6 years ago, that my property, the grass, the shrubs, the trees were a lot healthier. And I know it's not my imagination. I've been living here in North Carolina for 22 years now, and I have seen a very methodical, incremental degradation in the grass, the trees, the flowers, the shrubs. And the other thing is, many researchers and investigators have the lab results of what is in the soil.
Mm,
You mentioned the aluminum and the barium and the strontium and whatever else that it is, whatever else that they have in those aerosols. So this is not a figment of somebody's imagination. I mean, this stuff is real, and
yeah.
people are capturing it, and people, they're documenting it. But it becomes very frustrating because whenever somebody tries to carry the ball forward and try to get some change and get people to wake up, we're talking about the folks in the government, the agencies, and so on and so forth. They hit a stone wall, they hit a brick wall,
Yeah,
and it just dies right there. I mean, that's one of
yeah.
the most frustrating aspects of this. And something I always struggle with is we're raising all this awareness, and people are talking a lot about it on social media and websites and blogs and doing videos on Facebook and so on. But when the rubber hits the road and it's time to really do something about it, it doesn't materialize.
Well, here's the thing, Mike. There's clearly a public health risk here. Now, Michael J. Murphy in his documentary claims that respiratory mortality rates have been rising in the US for the last 3 decades, and that information can be verified by various official sources. That coincides with the aerosol operations in the US starting in the 1990s and escalating to full scale around 1998. So there's a clear correlation, although it hasn't yet been substantiated through research. There's a clear correlation that respiratory illness rates are on the increase as a result of these aerosol spraying programs. Now, what public authority is going to own up to that? In New Zealand, we have a Ministry of Health. Its job is to protect the safety and health of the public. You know, if this was covered by mainstream media, those ministries would be set for a grilling. The public would be saying, "You're not taking care of our health here. You're spraying chemicals into the atmosphere that can kill us, and you're doing nothing about it." No government is going to own up to that. An interesting connection to that was a few years ago, there was some leaked material in the US from a guy named, I think he was called Deep Shield. I think Alana Freeland refers to the source in her book. And anyway, part of that information was, a claim that there is a classified WHO report that estimates the global mortality due to respiratory illness as a result of geoengineering of being up to 2 billion people over a 6-decade period. You know, that's a staggering statistic, that this stuff could actually kill 2 billion people, which kind of leads us into that conversation around systemic depopulation.
Yeah.
But I've done some research into this also, and one of the sources I've been researching has confirmed to me that WHO report is indeed accurate, and that the WHO is aware, well, of course, the United Nations and the WHO are aware of this program. The WHO is complicit with it, and the WHO knows that the risk to the public from respiratory mortality is extreme.
One of the things that many people are struggling with today, Malcolm, we talk about the respiratory disorders. There's been an exponential increase in asthma.
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, actually more than a couple of years ago, several years back, I should say, I first heard the term adult asthma. In other words, it's asthma that has manifested once somebody got well into their adult years.
Sure.
Whereas originally asthma was known primarily as a respiratory disorder that a child would have or a young person would have. But also over the years, we've seen all kinds of over-the-counter medications come out with regard to asthma, allergies, and so on. When I was a kid growing up, every once in a while you would run into somebody who had allergies, as an example. It wasn't something that was pervasive by any stretch. Today, allergies are pervasive.
Yes.
For every 10 people that I run into, Malcolm, I would say probably 8 of them are taking some kind of allergy medication, over-the-counter allergy medication.
Sure.
Or they're taking some kind of inhaler. This is not stuff that was happening when I was a kid back in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and I'm going to say even into the 90s. Over the last 15 years or so, though, I've seen an increase in these types of medications and treatments. So you have to say to yourself, well, what's happening to everybody? I mean, why are people coming down with respiratory disorders? Why are they coming down with so many allergies? Well, the answer has to be, it's the environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clifford Carnicon has done quite a lot of research into this area as well. And, you know, and this is in connection to Morgellons disease. And he's identified blood-borne pathogens which have been detected in aerosol sprays. So, you know, these aerosol sprays, the particulate is very small. It lodges in the upper respiratory tract. And of course, if it contains any kind of biological agent, then that will get into the bloodstream. And, you know, there appears to be some evidence that connects to the Morgellons syndrome that people are reporting.
I did a show recently, Malcolm, with Sophia Smallstorm. Before the show, she said to me, Mike, I have some pictures of Morgellons.
Sure.
She knows somebody. This is not secondhand knowledge. This is somebody that she knows firsthand who is a big-time sufferer of Morgellons. This person had sent these pictures over to Sophia, and I'll tell you, Malcolm, it was very, very difficult to look at the pictures. Very, very difficult. And, you know, I have been looking into Morgellons on and off over the last few years, and I've seen pictures on the internet, but I have never seen anything like the pictures that Sophia showed me.
Sure.
And I mean, and what I'm referring to, folks, maybe I'll put it into the slideshow with this discussion with Malcolm. Basically, it looked like little insects,
Yeah.
bugs. It was just horrible. It really was.
Yeah.
And people who suffer from Morgellons, they are in tremendous pain. So it's real. Again, it's real. It's not make believe. It's sometimes I think when people talk about Morgellons, they think, oh, another conspirator, somebody else who's making something up. Some kind of person looking for attention. But the truth of the matter is, it is real and it's being suppressed.
Yeah, I mean that is very distressing to me, Mike. And I think for people who are affected by Morgellons, they are victims of isolated incidences where aerosol sprays have been used to essentially test or try out a particular biological pathogen. I don't believe that those pathogens are being sprayed on a widespread basis, but I think they're being used in certain areas at certain times for research purposes, biological warfare, principally. But in terms of the rest of us, for most of us, it's really the danger of respiratory illness, because these aerosols the fact is we're all air breathers. We cannot avoid this. And I noticed it particularly last summer, New Zealand summer, February, just past 2016. In Christchurch, we had the hottest February for 153 years. It was the hottest February on record. And it was a very intense heat. And I remember thinking, I've never experienced this kind of heat before. It's not like just a hot day. It's like an intense microwave heat. And also, I noticed I was experiencing shortness of breath on a regular basis. And I'm actually a pretty healthy guy. And, I was thinking, hey, I don't normally get shortness of breath. This is not normal for me. I put the pieces together, and, connected to that. February was a very high spray period in Christchurch. We were heavily aerosol sprayed over that period. So I'm saying, personally, that shortness of breath that I was experiencing, almost certainly a result of, respiratory stress from aerosol sprays.
It's interesting, Malcolm, that you should bring that up, because I've noticed the same thing here. And again, I'm in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. And granted, it does get hot in Raleigh, especially in the July, August timeframe. But what I've noticed is if I'm outside and it's 75, 80 degrees, I mean, it's warm, but it's not hot, that the intensity of the heat from the sun, it's not something that I remember. It feels very, very intense on your skin. And you could be outside, you could be doing some yard work at 75 degrees, and you go inside after getting done doing the work outside, and you're going to take a look at your arm, and you're going to see that it looks like your arm was somewhat cooked, And I've experienced the same thing as you with the shortness of breath, that I take good care of myself as well, but I've noticed that when it gets very hot here, it wasn't like this in the past. But I'm going to say over the last, 5 to 10 years or so, and it's getting worse. You could be outside, and it becomes difficult to breathe sometimes. I mean, to take a deep breath, it becomes labored. You're out of breath. You feel very fatigued. Some people will say, oh, okay, Mike, well, you're getting older. But you know what? I'm not convinced of that. Yes, I'm getting older, but when it doesn't feel normal to you.
That's absolutely right, Mike. I totally get that. And that's very similar to my experience. And, my understanding of this is it is the aluminium in the barium particulate, which is highly conductive. So it's actually the aluminium and barium particulate in the air surrounding us, the air that we're breathing, which is actually conducting radiative heat. So rather than just feeling the heat from the sun on your skin, which is what you will have remembered, it's what we're all used to, you're now actually feeling the heat of that ionized particulate, which is actually on your skin, it's what you're breathing, it's all around you, and it's intensifying that heat dramatically.
Even on a day when they're not spraying, when you look at the sky, it's not that deep blue. It has that white haze. At first, when you look at it, you're like, oh, blue sky. But then once you look at it closely, you will notice that there is a haze just hanging in the sky. It's really unbelievable. It's such a horrible thing that's being done. And
Yeah,
I just wish more people would just wake up to it.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, the geoengineers would say, "Oh, well, it's working."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, which is pretty shocking. Yeah, and I guess the thing about people waking up to this, I mean, we've touched on this already around, it's just too challenging for some people. Some people just don't want to know. Some people think, oh, well, maybe if the government's doing it, then it's probably the right thing. But, what is really needed is a much deeper awakening of consciousness here. I think we not only do people need to wake up to the fact that this spraying is taking place and that they need to actually be vocal about this. They need to be holding their public officials accountable, and they also need to be, visible in their own opposition to this. But also, I'd really like to see all those aerosol cans in the supermarkets removed from the shelves as well, because, this whole sort of culture of, we now live in an aerosol era, and that stuff shouldn't be sold in the supermarkets either.
You're right, Malcolm. And to be honest, I really didn't bring that perspective into my own thinking about
Mm,
what's being sold in the supermarkets, And then when you brought it up, I thought to myself, you know what? He's exactly right. People are walking around spraying stuff every which way from Sunday, putting pesticides down on the ground. All kinds of materials and aerosols and granules are being dispersed every single day with really no regard to what is the cumulative effect to the environment at the end of the day.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I can remember as a kid using fly spray, and I kind of shudder when I think about it now. But the fact is, this is the awakening that we are a part of. It's not just waking up to chemtrails; it's actually waking up to the massive kind of use of chemicals in the environment. Right from our own, from our own kitchen cupboard, right through to what's happening in the atmosphere. And it's got to be a change of consciousness for humanity, that people just recognize that we just can't continue doing this kind of stuff. It's that the environment is at a critical point now. I think in our lifetime, our generation, I mean, you've named it already, the stress on the environment, the effect on plants, the, you know, the planet just can't take this anymore.
If people would just take a step back to take in the beauty of Earth, to take in what it is that this environment is really supposed to be about,
Yeah.
versus being so detached from it, Malcolm. They're so detached from creation. And when you're
Mm.
not connected, you're going to allow things to happen that shouldn't happen. And that's exactly what's going on today. People are apathetic. They are ill-informed. They don't care. And the problem is that what I tell folks is, look, we only have one ship, USS Earth.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
if humanity doesn't wake up, the whole thing's going down. It's going to sink, and it's not going to be a pretty picture.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a global issue for all of humanity. I mean, something that concerns me now is that more than 50% of the human population on Earth live in cities of 1 million or more. You know, People are very disconnected from the natural environment. More and more people are growing up in urban environments. They live in apartments. They get their food from the supermarket. Their idea of nature is like the local park where they go and play baseball or something. That's what they think nature is, or a place you go for a holiday once in a while. And they're completely disconnected from the natural world. So when they look up and see aerosol spraying, that's not such a big deal because they think, well, maybe that's how they regulate the atmosphere so that we all have a good time here. That is really upsetting.
Yeah. Well, Malcolm, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add. Feel free. Otherwise, I don't want to
Yeah.
take up too much of your time because you've been very generous with your time, and we're
No,
up over an hour at this point in time. So, is there
yeah.
anything else you wanted to add?
No, it's a real pleasure to talk with you, Mike. And I have to say, it's really, really good to be able to share this with you because in the area that I'm researching, it's a little bit lonely, for the reasons I said before. I connect with people on Facebook. I connect with other researchers here in New Zealand. But I was going to say, if any of your listeners want to contact me, my email address is malcolmpetersonscott, all one word, malcolmpetersonscott@gmail.com. So I'm very happy for people to contact me, especially if they have information concerning aerosol operations in the Southern Hemisphere, particularly in New Zealand, because that's my area of research. And yeah, I'd love to talk with you again, Mike. I really appreciate the work you're doing. I said to you last time, I really appreciate your Facebook posts about your guitars, and every now and then a recording. And what I love about that is, because we're in this area of research, which is quite distressing, quite upsetting. It's really important to have good things going on in your life. And that's what I love about your work, that you mix your research and your investigation with your music and your passion and your guitars. And that's what I really love too.
No, thank you very much, Malcolm. I mean, the reason why I do that is because what I tell folks all the time is that you have to take a break and you have to connect back with your family and your friends and the things that you love to do. If you have hobbies, if you have interests, you need to do those things because we're here to enjoy life. We have to enjoy life as much as we possibly can. And quite honestly, the work that you're doing and the work that I'm involved in and many others, it can be extremely lonely. And I tell folks all the time, I do the radio shows. I don't get paid to do them. I don't receive any money for them. I mean, I might get a couple of pennies. I have my songs attached to the particular show or whatever, but it's minuscule. So the thing is, we're doing this stuff because we feel that it's the right thing to do. It's what we need to do. We need to pursue the truth, and we need to defeat this stuff because this stuff, at the end of the day, it's an anti-humanity agenda.
Indeed.
Right? But we still have to take a break every once in a while and enjoy our life. It is a balance because if you're just diving into this stuff all the time, 24 hours, 7 days a week, it's too grueling. It's too grueling. You'll wind up in a straitjacket somewhere.
Well, thankfully, my partner keeps reminding me of that when I bring home reports to read or I get my laptop out and she says, "Are you working on chemtrails?" And I go, whoops, sorry, I should have left that at the office, So you've got to have some balance, don't you?
Yeah. Well, Malcolm, thank you so much again for coming on the show, and you're welcome to come back anytime. So we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you have more progress on your thesis, we can catch up on that. Or if you just want to chit-chat about geoengineering or any other topic, all you need to do is just give me a call, email me, and we'll set it up.
Yeah, definitely. Once I've got some more material to share on this, let's keep in touch.
Okay, great. Thank you, Malcolm.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Bye-bye. And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.